This absolute mountain of a bike is the X26 from Engwe. It's bigger, faster, and more confusing than any other electric bike I've tested so far. The X26 is Engwe's third appearance on my channel. Their Engine Pro received an overwhelmingly positive review for a well-rounded bike. Their M20 was a cafe style, so apples and oranges comparison, had a few quirks, but mostly a lot of fun. With this X26, I have no idea what they were going for, and I'm very confused with some of the design choices. Admittedly, I still have no idea if I'm pronouncing Engwe properly, but they haven't complained about it yet, so I'm just going to assume I'm correct.
Yo, this be the Engwe. That's how I say it, so back off.
So, for better or worse, here's everything positive, negative, and confusing I noticed about the X26. The nature of this bike intertwines all the positives and negatives, so I'm just going to do this completely random, and I hope it makes sense. Standover height. That doesn't exist. You don't stand over this bike. Essentially, if you're human, you're too short for this bike. I'm 6'4", and with the seat at its lowest position, the stock handlebars had to be replaced immediately because I was hunched over like a race bike. Replacing the bars and dropping the seat brought me into a relatively comfortable stance for extended riding, but it sacrificed pedal efficiency. If I want to improve pedaling efficiency, I have to raise the seat, but then that puts me back to where I was before I replace the handlebars, so pedaling's not really something you're going to do much on this bike. Which is fine because the bike's power system was capable of handling almost everything I was able to throw at it without pedal assistance. That and the bike's dual battery setup combined to give you generous capacity at 29.2 amp hours. And just to give you some perspective, of course your results will vary, but hammering the throttle with basically no pedal assistance, on the back roads I was able to consistently get 35 miles of range before hitting 25% left on the battery. That being said, should you find a way to set up this bike for comfortable riding and pedal assistance, it has the best high-speed cadence out of anything I've tested so far, comfortably keeping up with the bike at 24 miles an hour. You can push it up to 26 before your legs start to run away. This one's technically a positive, but for previously mentioned issues, I don't know if you'll be able to utilize it. It has 9 customizable pedal assist levels, so should you find a way to pedal this bike comfortably, you can take advantage of precise speed adjustments. Okay, so this next issue is going to be a bit of a rant, but you guys probably already know what I'm going to complain about. This bike does not have cruise control. I get it, not everybody uses it. Stop and go city travel, probably not a big deal. Does this look like a stop and go city bike to you? These big fat tires, this massive frame, which is probably not going to fit in a lot of apartments? No. On long stretches of back roads, cruise control is so important for comfort, and they left it out of this bike. I have no idea why. I thought you were better than this, Engwe. Stop leaving cruise control off the bike. That was my angry narration voice. Now let's get back to the rest of it. So it's not the complete end of the world, with the 9 customizable pedal assist levels and the throttle being capped at each level. This means that you can just adjust the pedal assist level to your top speed and hold full throttle, which is okay for about 10 minutes until your wrist starts to fatigue, get tired, and go numb. I'm inclined to mention that this is in fact a folding bike, although I'm not really sure why. I can't see anybody purchasing this bike because they're limited on storage space. This thing is an absolute unit, and in fact, I damn near fell over the first couple times I tried to get on it. I suppose in some niche situations, folding the bike could help with long-term storage, and it is the only way to remove the internal battery, so I guess I can't complain that it's there. Do note that both batteries can be charged on the bike. You don't have to remove them, but removing them for long-term storage in a temperature-controlled environment is about the only reason you'd ever take them off the bike. Now, I want to talk about these batteries for a moment because I'm a little confused with the setup. It never affected me in a negative way. I couldn't find anything inherently bad about it, and I do suppose it's set up this way to maximize the amount of energy that can be stored on the bike, but if nothing else, it's interesting to talk about. The smaller battery in the frame is 10 amp hours, and the main battery is your actual seat post. It's 19.2. The smaller internal battery is always active and connected to the electronics, so when you hit the power button, that one always turns on. However, the main battery has a button on the top. If you forget to turn that on, you'll only be using the frame battery. The bike has a built-in battery equalizer, so if you're riding and you realize that you forgot to turn on your main pack a few miles in, you go to turn it on, it won't hurt anything. But I'm not sure exactly how these battery equalizers work. I assume it's one of two ways. Either it transfers energy from the pack that has more to the pack that has less, or the electronics of the bike will utilize the pack with more energy first until they're equal and then use them both. Hopefully it's the latter because the former seems much less efficient. I bring this up because there's a handful of bikes which allow you to turn on one or both batteries, and on bikes which use two packs of equal capacity, it's nice to use one on your out trip and the other on your return, which minimizes the risk of running out of power, which is what Engwe did on their M20 with dual batteries, each being equal capacity, and I really like that feature, but the X26 is always using the smaller pack, so I just keep the main battery on and treat this like one large battery. It makes range estimations a lot easier to deal with. Because the bike only comes with one charger, which is used for both packs, you have to swap that back and forth to charge both batteries, and because of this I was able to think of one positive situation, which was immediately followed by a negative. If you're going on short trips to the store or back and forth from work, less than 10 miles, you could always just use the internal battery, keeping your main one charged and topped off. But this also means that you're not equally discharging your pack, so the life expectancy would be disproportionate to each other. And plus, leaving your main battery charged fully for an extended period of time is not a good thing for the life of these batteries. Moving on to the frame of the bike, I might be overthinking this. I'm just not sure how I feel about the main battery pack being a structural piece of the frame. Well, kinda. It's the seat post, so it's not that critical. And most people are going to run this at its lowest height, so there wouldn't be much of a strain on this. It does feel sturdy, and I guess it's space efficient using that for batteries instead of empty space. Still not sure how I feel about that. Is it the best option? I really don't know. So I'm not sure if it comes across on camera the stature of this bike, but in person it's big. And at a glance you would assume this wouldn't have any issues with ground clearance, but unfortunately handling everyday obstacles like going off a curb is a bit of an issue, because this bike doesn't have a lot of ground clearance thanks to the seat tube. I initially thought this was long to protect the battery in its lowest position, but I was able to stick most of my hand up in the seat tube without feeling the battery, so they could have cut this down at least 3 or 4 inches to give you more ground clearance. Slamming this on curves does not feel or sound great, but it probably won't hurt. With the frame being as unique as it is, I don't see any issues. This thing looks and feels like a tank. The front suspension is a triple tree setup, and it's nice. Makes you feel real connected to the road and gives a decent amount of dampening. It's not premium quality, but it's a step above the rest. The rear suspension is another area on the bike where I'm confused. Not concerned, just confused. They've implemented some sort of triple rear suspension, or at least that's the best name I can give it, with 2 coilover air shocks in the rear and a mechanical shock in the middle. Now this one in the middle doesn't appear to actually do much, if anything at all. Looking at the caked on mud, I can tell that this thing really never moves. And with my riding environment being as abusive as it is, if this thing was going to move, I definitely would have noticed. So we can pretty much ignore this, kind of like it doesn't exist on the bike. It's just an added component for reasons. Let's take a look at the rear coilover shocks. These are actual air shocks, which you can pump up and they'll hold air and get stiffer, but you won't because with the coilovers set to their softest position and 0 psi added to the shocks, your rear suspension is just about right for a 200-pound rider. It's a little on the stiff side, but you can feel it working. I suppose an extra heavy rider, 250 pounds plus, might find some use in the adjustments here, but the average rider's not. Should you find yourself in a situation which could benefit from adding air to the rear shocks, good luck, because I was not able to find a PSI rating on the shock, in the manual, or on the website, so I have no idea how much air you can safely put in these. Now, when you put on a rear passenger, that's where the rear suspension really starts to shine and make a big difference. I carried my girl around with these a few times. She weighs about $120, and the bike felt great. It was really controllable and comfortable. Adding the extra weight in the rear made the suspension go to work. But unfortunately, this is another confusing part of the bike. See, it comes with a rear seat, and the supports for that seat, along with the suspension system, look and feel like they could handle a normal adult rider. But when I reached out to ask how much weight this could support, they told me it was only 55 pounds. Now that doesn't seem right. That seems like the kind of safe answer they gave because they really didn't know. But I can't say how much weight you can put on this seat. Plus, the bike didn't come with pegs, so there was nowhere for them to put their feet. I had to purchase these off Amazon, and I'll put a link in the description in case you're interested. Moving on to the user interface, we've got lock-on grips, as you know, easy to remove, easy to adjust, and fairly comfortable for what they are. Push-pull trigger shifter, so you don't need to adjust your grip when changing gears, always nice. You get 8 speeds on that shifter, it's mated up to a tourney derailleur, and as mentioned before, I don't have any issues with these, but I would like to point out that the lowest gear on this bike is a bit tall, which means if you're helping the bike up a really steep incline, you're gonna get a bit of a workout. Their heads-up display is great. This is the same one they used on the Engine Pro, and I really like this. It's the brightest color display I've seen so far, which has been the easiest to read in lighting conditions. Still prefer monochrome, but this is fine. I'm happy with it. And it comes with a USB charge port, which is great. At least they didn't take that off the bike. Charge my phone. You can charge an extra light, because you probably will want to. The headlight on this bike is kind of meh. The taillight's also kind of meh. They're pretty dim. They could be a lot brighter. But lately I've been using this to charge this little drone I bought, which has been a lot of fun to take out in these backwoods and fly around. So hey, you can charge a drone with your bike. Cool for the adventure riders.
The Force is with you, young Skywalker. But you are not a Jedi yet.
Being the same heads-up display they used on the Engine Pro, which I really like. This gives you all the same customizability features except for cruise control. But, you know, auto dimming display, auto on-off headlights when it gets dark, which I disable because it still is kind of funky on overcast days. Customizing your pedal assist levels, battery bar indicator. But I should point out the battery bar indicator on this bike has been pretty accurate, so I don't think you'll need to adjust that. And gives you a wattage readout for how much you're using. It's a pretty generic thumb throttle, but the tune of the bike is nice. It has good resolution, allowing for precise and easy adjustments in speed. The bike's on-demand power is nice, but it's not touchy, and it won't jolt you back and forth if you bump the throttle. It's pretty smooth. Quickly touching back on the head and tail light, they are integrated into the bike's electrics, and they run off the main battery so you don't have to recharge them. It actually has a secondary rear light. As long as you have the main battery activated, there's a bright light right under the seat, which complements the main tail light of the bike. It's kind of blocked by the seat's handle, so I don't know how useful it is. That being said, the main tail light's pretty dim. I would like to see this a lot brighter, and the headlight as well. It's not the worst I've tested, it just doesn't match the quality and price of this bike. I need a brighter headlight with further throw. Wide pattern's pretty nice. You can see quite a bit off to the side, it's just not very bright. Hydraulic front and rear brakes, 180mm rotors, only dual piston calipers, but it's had ample stopping power. No complaints here, and in this price point, it's kind of expected, so good job. We have alloyed wheels with sealed bearings. Thank you. Now, the alloy wheels on this bike are the largest diameter ones I've tested so far, and I'm not sure if I would have chosen them over spoked wheels. Now, normally, on these smaller 20-inch diameter wheels, I like the alloys because they're just one less thing to worry about, even though they're a little bit heavier. But when you start getting into the larger diameters, then you have to deal with flex, and on these fat tire bikes, probably not a big issue, but these things don't like to flex. So if you were really hard on this bike, the wheels might be an area of concern. That being said, I feel about 1,000 times safer riding these alloy wheels than the cheap ones that you get on gas bike websites. Unfortunately, no puncture resistant tires, which is something I really would have liked to seen at this price point, and as I found out, I got a flat. Puncture resistant tires are one of those things that when you work, you don't know they're working because they're working, but when they don't work, you definitely know they didn't work. Not that that really matters because on this bike it didn't have them, so they definitely didn't work, but I got a huge thorn, and this time I decided to record it because I'd previously seen a bike reviewer get a flat, fat tire and spend $45 at a bike shop to get it patched. And I thought that was ridiculous, so I just wanted to show you guys exactly how easy it is to repair these large diameter fat tires. Other than a pump and a patch, literally no tools. Don't have to take anything off the bike. You basically pull the tube out of the tire, find the hole, and patch it. Put it back on, pump it back up, realize it had 2 holes because the thorn was so long that it went through both sides of the inner tube. So deflate the tire, pull the tube back out, patch the other side, and then put it back in. And by the way, if you have alloy wheels and you hear air coming out of the valve stem area, don't freak out. It's probably not the valve stem. It's because these alloy wheels are fully sealed when they're pumped up, so that's the only way air can escape is at the valve stem. On spoked wheels, that you probably won't hear it there because it'll come out of the spoke caps, but yeah, don't freak out. Alright, moving on to the fun part, power delivery. One aspect of this bike that really shines, and is also somewhat confusing. So we'll get the non-confusing part out of the way first. As far as consumer-grade electric bikes go, this is the fastest one I've tested. 32 miles an hour with my 200 pounds on flat ground, and that's on the back roads. I don't know if it's capped at 32, or if that's just what the motor will do with its electrical limitations. If you're a lightweight rider, you might be able to squeeze a few more miles per hour out of it. The interesting part is that top speed is unlocked out of the box. You don't have to put in a code or anything, but there is a catch. It's limited to 3-minute burst. There's 3 modes on the bike, and this is where we're going to start to get into the confusing bits of this setup. There's Eco, Normal, where you'll spend pretty much all of your time riding, and Sports. Now, Eco limits the motor to 750 watt cruising speed, but will still give you full power during acceleration. Normal is the same. You'll get full power, which according to the readout display is up to 1400 watts in all modes. So when you're accelerating, you have all the power available. When it reaches cruising speed, normal mode will taper off at about 1000 watts. And then sports mode will just go straight up to 13 or 1400 watts, depending on how it feels. If it's cooler, it seems to run higher watts, but as it heats up, it'll shrink down. I've seen it go as low as 1200 in sports mode. That's just an observation, not a complaint. It's been over 100 degrees every day for the past 4 weeks here, so it's obviously got some thermal throttling going on. Now back to sports mode. They clearly implemented this as a temporary burst only. It's burst for 3 minutes and then it automatically kicks you into normal mode and goes on cooldown for 10 minutes, where you cannot go back into sports mode until the cooldown is complete. Given that I'm usually riding around 20 miles an hour, this is fine, it doesn't bother me. Having that extra burst of speed for a short duration could be useful for a lot of people, but I guess it's mostly just there for fun. However, to get to any of the modes, you hold down the I button. Your bike starts in normal mode. If you hold down I, it goes to sports. If you hold it down again, it goes to eco and then back to normal. But to get to eco mode, you have to go through sports mode. And if you go into sports mode, the timer starts immediately, even if you don't use it. You could just cycle through it real quick and it'll go on cooldown, which is kind of annoying. You know, there should be like a 10-second grace period before it activates the cooldown. Whatever, it doesn't really affect me, but it's one of those things that's confusing. The most confusing part is eco mode. If you're trying to stretch max range out of this bike, I would use eco mode, where it limits your cruising speed to 750 watts. But unfortunately, if you're using the throttle, after about 5 minutes, it automatically kicks you back into normal mode, and I cannot figure out why it does this. It just, all of a sudden, you'll have more power. You'll look down, it'll be in normal. You go back to eco, and 5 minutes later, it goes back to normal. It's not a big deal, it's just confusing. Despite this bike having some, let's say, outside-of-the-box design choices, borderline identity crisis, there's really not much I have to complain about. These things might be confusing, but they haven't really made the experience any worse. My biggest complaint is the lack of cruise control, but there is one other thing which is really disappointing to see that they either overlooked or didn't care about. There is no rubber grommet on the pass-through of the frame for the wires. The wires that are routed internally come out of the frame and they contact bare metal. Over the long-term duration of a bike, this can be a major safety concern, so I'd like to see them put a rubber grommet here. To sum up my first impressions of the X26 from Engwe, despite this bike catching me really off guard with how it's set up, it's still an absolute blast to ride. Even in normal mode, the top speed of 28 miles an hour is fine, the sports mode burst is great, you have good components on the bike, they didn't overlook the fine details other than the rubber grommet and cruise control, but there's one thing I'd like to say. You're probably better off, if you're interested in this kind of bike, going with their X24. Had I known how massive this bike would be, I would have gone with the smaller version, because I am absolutely sure that it would have been fine. I'm not really complaining about the size of the bike, I just wasn't ready for it, and if you want a really big bike, well, here you go. But another reason why I would think the X24 version would be better is because you're getting the same battery capacity, same power, same sports mode unlocked top speed, but the smaller diameter tires are going to give it more acceleration and torque. Better for climbing hills, easier to pedal in the lowest gear. This is just simply because it's using smaller tires. As far as I can tell, everything else on the bike is exactly the same. And they have an X20 model, which appears to have the same power system, but a slightly smaller battery, and that might be a go-to as well. However, the X24 is better built for my riding situations, so if you're in rugged terrain, that would be the way to go, in my opinion. And I think on the smaller version of this bike, a lot of the design choices make more sense. Anyways, I hope you guys got some useful information out of today's video, or at the very least, were mildly entertained. And until next time, ride safe.